This is a quote from comedian Youngmi Mayer's book. Speaking of shared Asian American experiences, though, there's nothing I can say about my experience as an Asian American that hasn't already been said in Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club. I thought that was a joke until I rewatched the movie version to write this prologue, and then spiraled about how I should just throw the whole book away because everything's already in that fucking movie. Welcome to the Damned If You Do podcast, where two cousins share our experiences growing up as children of immigrants
and how we navigate the world today as teachers, mothers, and women of color who have something to say. So that is from Youngmi Mayer's new book. I'm laughing because I'm crying. It's a memoir. And that is also the same title of her stand-up book reading show that was showcased in Chicago about a month ago, and Praise and I had the honor of watching it. It was a very interesting, immersive experience. Youngmi Mayer is an American stand-up comedian, activist, podcast host, and social media influencer, according to Wikipedia. I agree. We can
gotta source it.
Oh boy, I'm in trouble if I'm citing Wikipedia. It's like the one source I always tell my students not to reference, amongst others, like fake news. Anywho, so the reason why Praise read that excerpt from her prologue, which she did in fact share in her stand-up book reading show, I don't know what else to call it, is because, one, I think that while most people may not be familiar with Youngmi Mayer, most people or some people are familiar with the cultural touchstone of Amy Tan, the amazing author, and her she's actually written many books, but one of which is Joy Luck Club.
Right.
And I think that is it speaks to many generations of many cultures, racially or ethnically. And I grew up loving Joy Luck Club. I read part of the book. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't read the whole thing.
What? Girl, I did not know.
You know I'm a lazy reader. I cheat.
I'm shocked.
I know. What was that like in high school back in the day when we went? Cliff Notes. If there were Cliff Notes, I would have read it, I'm sure. But I did watch the movie, and it's one of my top 10 movies. It still is. It's iconic for me. And if you've watched it, you know that it spans generations, and it follows 8 women, daughters and mothers, and their very complicated relationships and histories, and how they're all intertwined.
Chinese, American, and immigrant daughters and mothers.
Yes.
I hope that's obvious.
Yeah.
But who knows? Okay.
And it's really interesting and very touching, and I remember one of the last times I watched it, second to last, was the night before I moved out of my very first Chicago apartment, which interestingly is a few blocks from where I've lived right now.
Yeah.
3 blocks away on Tallman Ave. Shout out to Tallman and Julie and Michelle, with whom I lived with and whom I'm still really good friends with. And the night before we moved out, or maybe perhaps 2 nights before, we put that movie on.
Yeah.
We pitched a tent in our living room. Those bitches, of course, fell asleep before me. Just like you do, Praise.
I was
going
to say, it's your fate.
I'm always like that one, crackhead who's up, watching the movie by myself, feeling very alone, but very, titillated by the movie, if it's good.
You still haven't forgiven me for leaving you alone to watch that Bjork movie?
Dancer in the Dark. I'm salty as shit.
I fell asleep.
Because that movie was dark.
Okay, so tent in the living room.
Tent in the living room. We're watching Joy Luck Club. And Julie fell asleep. No, I'm sorry. Michelle fell asleep first, I believe. And then I grabbed my makeup bag. And I had some weird leftover makeup from my mom. Not that she ever used it, but I'm sure her white friends gave it to her.
Oh my God.
I think it was Avon or Right. I know. I'm telling you my age without telling you my age. And I gave Michelle a makeover while she was sleeping.
During the Joy Luck Club?
During the Joy Luck Club. And then Julie fell asleep too. And it's such a like profound coming of age memory for me in Chicago.
And why is coming of age memory like in your 20s?
Coming of age, living on your own, adulting.
Yeah,
Not that we hardly adulted. But yeah, that movie is so good, and I love that Youngmi Mayer incorporated it into her book because I think it is truly a touchstone for many people, but particularly Asian Americans or children of immigrants.
I watched it with my Filipina girlfriends in Skokie.
Of course you did.
In a middle school, and we bawled our eyes out.
You can't not. And I'm not a crier, but I bawled my eyes out.
We're like, your heart is best quality crab.
That's exactly right.
Or whatever she said about the heart. Anyway, you choose worst quality crab because your heart is best quality crab.
Yeah.
Like, my heart is fucking best quality crab, baby. But then I remember dating my husband, Gary, and I said, I will not even consider being in a serious relationship with you unless you at least watch the movie. And so we watched it together. And he was like, at some point in the movie, he like made some joke of, like, he was sort of acting flippantly at some point in the movie. And I paused it and I was like, if you're not going to take this seriously, you're not taking our relationship seriously.
Because that's what it really meant, right?
And the crazy thing is, from that time that I showed that movie to him until now, that's Chinese, right? That's a Chinese movie that we relate to as immigrants.
Yeah.
And Asians. But since then, like over the last 10 to 15 years, the Korean art scene has exploded. Korean American art scene has exploded. In terms of film, in terms of like visual arts, in terms of comedy.
Right. And Youngmi Mayer is becoming a trailblazer for our generation.
When I first saw Youngmi Mayer on like TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever, I was like, I've never, ever seen a Korean person in the media like this.
Unhinged, as you would say. Raw. She's very raw.
And she says that she also is, you know. It's her thing. But yeah, she's very raw, and there's something so honest about her, and she's pretty, like, she says things that, like, are really I don't want to say politically incorrect, but, like, they could be very offensive to a lot of people, and especially white people.
They're very politically charged from a very specific lens and specific stances. And she is not afraid to share them.
No, she does not give a shit. I mean, she might give a shit, but not enough to stop talking.
And, well, I was introduced to her by you.
Right.
And I remember one of the first reels I watched of her was her. It wasn't politically charged, but she was talking about what kind of plant owner she is. And so she describes how she goes into a plant store and she looks around, and finally when she finds the one, she looks at it and she thinks, yes, you are the one I'm gonna fucking kill. And I fell in love with her in that moment.
Do you remember I sent you a screenshot where it's like, I just found out I have ADHD, or as my mom calls it, no you don't.
I mean, right there.
She's so funny.
Yeah. So she co-hosts and hosts Feeling Asian and Hairy Butthole podcasts that showcase or speak to the Asian American experiences.
Yeah.
But she just came out with a memoir. Again, it's called I'm Laughing Because I'm Crying. Praise, of course, dove into and digested it.
I read it. It's my one book a year that I read, and that one was it.
That's amazing. Good for you. Air high five. Have I cracked mine open? No, I have not. But I did attend her book reading based on it, which I thought was just going to be stand-up, which is what she, I think, originally became, known for.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting experience. So tonight, we're going to talk to you about what that experience was like, her book reading. And I'm going to say, look at us coming at y'all with dropping another podcast upbeat. I think we're finding some kind of cadence. It's not coming good at random every 3 to 8 months. So be proud of us.
Good. All right, what's our first top? I wrote down Linda was like, come up with like a few topics we can talk about from the reading, and I did it on the spot. All right, what's your, like, when you went into the book reading or whatever, or like, and you first started listening to her? What was your like first impression?
So someone opened up for her, which is why I thought it'd be stand-up, because the person who opened up for her only did stand-up. And she made me feel anxious. So we rolled up with 2 different groups. I actually met up some of the folks, my sisters, in a group called Ajimas, Ajima Rising. And I don't know if any listener out there is familiar with them, but it's actually, simply put, it is an Asian American community that's very intentional, and they do flash mobs. And it like started in California. There's a Chicago chapter that was founded several years back.
Korean American, right?
It is Asian American,
but
is? There are many Korean Americans in it.
Uh-huh.
And not that you even have to be Asian American, but that is primarily whom it, speaks to, and we've connected in this kind of community, and it's been really interesting for me because another through line in the group isn't just being Asian American and ladies who love to dance, and I'm certainly one of those people.
Yes, you are.
But it's also, there are many Korean adoptees. I've never met so many Korean American adoptees in my entire life.
Yeah.
And they all happen to be in one group. And it's been really interesting, and that will be a whole nother podcast episode. Yeah. But they have very many different journeys and experiences with being adopted and possibly trying to find or connect with their biological families. Yeah. So it's been a great community, and some of those folks came out, and then we also came out with some of our close friends.
Yeah.
And one of them cracked me up because one of our friends told me, because I picked her up and we drove there together, but she told me that she wasn't that familiar with Youngmi Mayer, but had recently just learned of her. And after the person who did the opening bit was done and Youngmi Mayer herself actually came out on stage, our friend asked me, who's that? Who dis? And I'm like, girl, you don't know what you don't know what she looks like then. So
exactly.
So that was funny, but yeah, it was interesting. And then when Youngmi Mayer herself started, I very quickly realized she was doing readings from her book, which I did not anticipate. And it was she came out, she has this like nervous, funny energy, and she immediately basically said something to the effect of like, wow, there's a lot of white people. They're everywhere. And I know there's definitely a camp of Asian American comedians, and let me say people of color comedians, mm-hmm. who have that shtick. Yeah. And to me, I've heard that so often, it's almost become a trope to me. Right. But I did appreciate her saying that, because I think it sets a certain tone right away, right? Meaning her comedy is going to be politicized, meaning she's going to be raw in a very specific way. Mm-hmm. That's intentional. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I was looking forward to that.
She's not here to take care of white people's feelings.
She's not there to take care of anybody's feelings. And respect for that. Yeah. Respect. Because she said, and I know you're going to bring that up later in our discussion, but like she said things that not every, I think, Korean American or Asian American person appreciated or would agree with either. Yeah. And I'm going to totally respect her for that, because she owns her lived experiences so much. Right. And there was like a serious, somber tone that kind of fell in the room when she started reading, because most of the excerpts that she shared were very serious and heartbreaking. Yeah. So that was my first impression. What about you?
I thought she was so... so I've been following... In the group of 5 women that we came with, I'm literally the only person who had heard of Youngmi Mayer except for you, right? Like, and nobody had heard... I invited, like, my Korean American friends, and they were just like, okay, let's just have a mom's night out type of...
Which, I mean, the thing with mom's night out is the desperation is so
They would have done anything.
They would have done any... Like, we could have, like, bungee jumped to, like... sat quietly in a library together, as long as we're away from our children, whom we love dearly.
Exactly. So, like, first of all, I feel like there was like a miscommunication, because I was like, everyone, let's go see Youngmi Mayer. She's my favorite comedian at this point. She's a Korean American comedian. Let's go see her. And in my mind, I thought it was very obvious that it was a book reading, because on the ticket, it's like a copy of her book, you know? But I did not communicate this, because literally every single person I brought was like, I didn't know this was a book reading.
Also, nor do we care.
No.
In fact, it was wonderful.
It was so wonderful. And she came out like awkwardly, but like also roasting the comedian before her for mispronouncing her own name.
Oh, that's right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god.
No, not mispronouncing her own name, but anglicizing her own name.
Yes.
For white folks.
Because she's tired of hearing the mispronunciation of her own name.
Right.
And so she made it, you know, I don't even know if it's all that much better, but she just, this is what I mean. She cares for no one's feelings.
But she was making the point of, do not anglicize your own name to make other people comfortable.
Yes.
Say your name.
It's your name.
And I will learn it. And every motherfucker should learn it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was awesome. I really found her very empowering in that way.
Yeah.
It's like, by her not catering to anyone's feelings, she is actually taking care of us. Like, it's an interesting...
Say my name,
balance.
say my name. Da, 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 da,
oh my god.
Da, da,
I knew you wouldn't know that second line.
Hey, there's a lot of power in that line. It's almost it's like Frozen, you know, let it go. Anyways, keep going.
My gosh. So I thought, like, she came out swinging.
Yeah.
You know? Were there any parts of her book that you found, like when she started reading, that you found interesting or that stick out to you right away?
All of it.
All right, next topic. What's one?
Well, okay, let's get into the book.
Yeah.
The readings that she shared.
Yeah.
So I will not do justice to this, because if any of this interests you, that I very sloppily will explain right now, please go ahead and read her book, or at least do the decency and read a summary of her book.
Just read the prologue. It'll suck you in.
Yeah, or use AI. Who cares?
Oh my god, no, don't do it.
I know, but people are anyways.
Okay.
So basically she talks about her growing up in Korea and how she uses a very specific childhood memory as a very strong analogy to how she felt and how she and many other young Korean girls were treated.
Yeah.
Where she talks about like how they used to walk by that pet store, and there was like a litter of puppies, and you know, her and her friends, like I think after school, would like, you know, fog up the window and press their faces, and they would point out the puppies that they which ones would choose. Not that they can adopt dogs, because of course their parents would beat them for even asking, right? It's Korea. And she mentions that her friends always chose like the cute ones or the really perky ones, but she always wanted the one that was like the most malnutritioned, you know, wimp in the corner, that was like completely overlooked and least taken care of, which already tells me a lot about her. And then she talks about how one day they noticed that a puppy, maybe that weakest one, the one that she loved, is about to be killed because it's so weak or too much of a runt. And then her and her friends hysterically start crying, and the owners are really confused by their like really strong emotive reaction. And she then analyzes it for us, as she does in her book, where she talks about how it really, like, all the puppies essentially look the same, but their bark and their voice was all uniquely different. And she then draws the analogy of, you know, Korean girls were there's such a strong culture of conformity, safety, compliance, always following the rules, always listening to your elders blindly. Anyone in a position of authority, even it comes to great harm and detriment to yourself. And she talks about how, like, she and her friends were always treated the same or maltreated.
They had the same haircut too, and they literally had the same uniform.
And they were like, you know, always spoken at or yelled at. They had no real agency aside from sounding different and to fight against the homogeny, feeling so homogenized and so much put in a box, she talks about how like she and the girls were trying to find their voices and how, I don't know, I made this connection of like, right, her through her comedy and her adult life, she's been trying to find her voice ever since, and she really has found one that's really remarkably strong and unique and interesting.
Like that other people might think that you're the same, and yet the puppies like resist because they're like, we're not the same.
We're gonna yip and we're gonna bark even on my very last day of living.
And they all have very different personalities that you can't force to be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that analogy really helpful and interesting. I thought what I think is interesting about her is that she's like, oh, do you remember that she made this joke where she's like, when I first came to the States, my Asian American girlfriends warned me. They warned me that white people would not be able to tell us apart. And I thought they were joking.
Oh boy.
She was like, I thought they were joking. Until she realized that like they can't tell apart like a 20-year-old from like an 80-year-old woman.
I love that something. So much. Because I thought she was going to do the typical route of ni hao. Like everyone thinking she's Chinese. But no, she talked about how wonderful our skin is. Essentially.
But isn't it so funny? Like she's like, I thought they were joking, like, because to her, in her perspective, that's ludicrous.
Yes.
To think like somebody from, let's say, Southeast Asia looks like somebody from like East Asia, you know, or like they're different phenotypes, for God's sake.
Right. Or even like two Koreans in a room.
Yeah, of course.
Guess what? They're two different people.
They have two faces.
Please have eyes in your head and please use them.
So the parts of her reading that I don't remember exactly what she said, but I found so compelling is that because she grew up outside of American society, she doesn't have in her bones the sort of double consciousness, the trauma that people of color or other sorts of minorities have when they from America, always in the back of your mind having the white gaze, right? Gaze. Not Gays.
That's really funny that you say that because one of my friends and coworkers, when I said white gays, she was like, when I first heard of that, I literally thought it meant like clubbing in like Boys Town.
Somebody has said that to me, which is why I just made sure that it's the white gays.
Yeah.
But you know, like she doesn't have that in the back of her mind, despite being half white.
Right. Which is even more interesting. That is another complex layer.
Yeah.
She is biracial, but grew up most of her life in Korea.
She has the Korean gaze, which is
right,
which is feeling like she's never Korean enough.
Yeah,
but she doesn't have the white gaze, which is what you and I and all the rest of us grew up with, and so she has this sort of freedom that like I found very fascinating.
Right
now, you know, and in her book, the part that she read out loud was that because of that freedom, she. Like we trust her in some way that she's not going to throw us under the bus for a joke that will make white people laugh.
Yes. And wait, just to elaborate real quick, I know a lot of you know what the white gaze is, but if you don't, or if you haven't ever thought about it that much, it's basically people of color internalizing white superiority that appears and is manifested in so many ways and historically has always been there. And if you are invisible to that, then that either means you are white or you grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, town, city.
Yeah.
And so you might have been in a bubble, but if you're in an urban setting where it's very culturally diverse, you probably are familiar with white gaze, or you felt it in many ways. And another way of putting that is she's praised, what you're referencing is she has the freedom because Youngmi Mayer, who grew up in Korea most of her life, the doubt ethnically or culturally that she may have felt is, am I Korean enough? Whereas Korean Americans, not all of us, but many of us who feel white gaze within ourselves, it is a question of, am I Korean enough and am I white enough to fit in?
Yeah. Why can't I be an American?
Yeah.
Like, am I American enough?
Yeah.
Right?
Am I American enough?
But quite often that equates to being the white mainstream.
Yeah. And not that you feel like you need to be, but you're reminded of all the ways that you're not.
So at the end of the day, like, you and I feel very not white. I mean, it's not like we're sitting there trying to be white.
Right.
And
I did have blue contacts in high school. I know. I look back and I'm like, that was problematic.
That's cringy, but you were young.
Girl, I did a lot of cringy shit. Shit.
But it's especially, Asian American. There's a lot of Asian Americans who grew up in predominantly, like, not Asian spaces. We're truly while our numbers are growing, we're still a numerical minority, right? So it's
right.
We don't like the word minority necessarily anymore, but I'm just talking literally.
Technically, we are. Yeah.
And so a lot of Asian Americans grow up in white spaces, or they grow up in different spaces, right? And so it's you and I think at this point in our lives, like, we really don't have that. But what that double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about for Black people is that you can't help it. You just grew up. I mean, if you grow up here, it's in you. You can't. It's not like you can fight it and it's gone, right? Because this is the society that you grew up in.
Right. And this is why, in Minor Feelings, she talks about it is the ontological experience.
Yes.
Where it's not like a one and done ever. It is a daily. It is a weekly. It is a monthly. It is all the ways that people assume things or misunderstand things or humorously say things that are offensive.
Right.
They may be nice, but they're still offensive. Or they may be just offensive and racist as shit and are proud of it. And it can come in the largest or smallest of ways, and it often comes abruptly, and it takes your breath away.
Do you remember playing, though not you and me playing, but wait, let me talk about one other thing. What I thought was really fascinating is, like, the vibe in the room with Asian Americans, because there were a lot of white people in the room, but there were a lot of Asian Americans in the room, and other people too. Like, we were sitting next to very diverse people around us, but we went with 6 women. There's 3 people in one row and 3 people in another row, like right behind, right? And there are times where she's doing readings in her book that were Korean. Like, she would say the Korean phrase, and then she would translate it for everybody else into English. And it was so cool that, like, she would say the Korean, and all 6 of us would, and with all the other Koreans in the room, would viscerally respond because she's reading something traumatic or whatever it is, and we would viscerally respond, and then she would translate it, and everybody else would then respond.
Yeah.
And it felt like the night was for us. Just that, like, feeling. Like,
yes,
this night
because
is for
she
us.
said it in Korean first.
That's right.
And she explained it through a Korean lens.
Yes.
But also through a Korean American lens.
Yeah.
Which is more new to her.
Right.
But really our lived experiences. That's almost a triple consciousness of a kind.
Oh my God. Do you know, I remember feeling this when I watched the movie Minari, right, which came out a few years ago. And remember, after you and I watched it together,
right,
and afterward I thought, oh my God, I understood everything in that movie, all the references, everything, context, whatever. And
wait,
then
I did not have that experience.
But then I thought, is this what white people feel all the time?
Yeah.
Like, it's made for them. Like, this movie was made for me. Like, that's how it felt, although everyone could enjoy it.
Okay.
Just like we enjoy everything, you know?
Yeah.
And then this night also felt that way.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like this is our night. Everybody else is a guest. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
But this night belongs to us.
Yeah. I think you very aptly put it, and I would 100% agree with you.
Yeah. What did you think about the white boy game?
Well, before we get there, talk to me a little bit about how one of your friends reacted to her in her describing the Korean experience.
It's okay. So this is why you can't even say, like, 6 Korean women and they're the same puppies, because all 6 of us had very different experiences.
Right. One of us didn't even know who she was and took a minute to get there. But sure.
She was like, what am I doing here?
She's a very lovely, intelligent
We love
person,
her so much, and she had a great time.
She had a great time.
And then another one of us.
I love that you say us.
Well, it's the 6 of us who went.
God, there's, Asian Americans. It's the collective spirit always.
Well, okay, so another one
trauma bonding.
Our friends who went is that she's very unique, and she actually listens to this podcast, so shout out to you. But
Love you, girl.
she's has a very unique background because she grew up in a large part in the United States, so she speaks fluent English and sounds completely like a Midwesterner.
Yes.
And then she also grew up in multiple countries, not just Korea, but also, you know, a country in Africa, a country in another country in Asia. Okay, so she has like all sorts of, you know, different contexts and backgrounds. And I think that she found Youngmi Mayer's take interesting. And we went home and had a long conversation about what does it mean to have this kind of narrative and experience about Korea, and what does it mean to be Korean and speak for Korea, because really there's actually still so few voices, at least in English, describing Korea, that sometimes I think that we feel protective over that voice. And so that was something that we had talked about.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's interesting and it's complicated, of course, because anything thoughtfully, you know, reflected upon or analyzed for culture is always complex.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you've listened to the TED Talk, The Danger of a Singular Story, it's not that we're saying there's a singular lived experience, but we do need very specific lived experiences to be shared.
Right.
To understand the complexity and the amalgamation of experiences, right? And it's like when people, especially Korean Americans, because our profile is, I think, still very monolithic in a lot of ways compared to other, right, racial, ethnic cultures that I feel like are much more multifaceted and complex in like pop culture, right, social media.
Right.
You know, this is why I respect her so much, and people who like break through that monolith. Yeah. Not to say, hi, I now represent Korea.
No.
But it's, hey, this is one representation of Korea, and I feel empowered and emboldened enough to stand by my story.
I think she had to do a lot of like self work to get to that point. I mean, this is an assumption. Oh no, maybe she talked about it in a book.
I think it's very clear that she's
because
done a lot of work.
Her prologue is literally like, does my voice matter?
Yeah.
Or did Amy Tan say it all for me? You know? And she's like, well, white guys write the same book over and over and over again and seem to think their voice is so important.
Right.
And then her message is, hey, we all have a little white man living inside of us. And she goes, and for me that's literal because my dad is white.
Love it.
So I mean, I think it's true. You know, I remember. Okay, this just came up for me when I was 25. I took a creative writing class.
Yeah.
And I wrote a story about my mom. I still remember it. It was called The Haircut. Okay. And it was about my mom trying to give me a haircut, but all of like my frustrations with her coming up throughout the story, flashbacks, and at the end I ruined the haircut she gives me. So that's the end of the story.
Okay.
Sounds amazing, actually. Where's that copy? I don't know.
I would read it tonight.
And after I wrote it, I turned it in, and I said to my professor, I feel weird about this story because I feel like it's a stereotype now about girls and their like Asian girls and their moms. Like I don't like writing a stereotype of myself, and this is that white gaze, right? Because I'm always thinking of myself and my identity in the lens of a stereotype. Like, is it stereotypical or is it not? Do I have to buck it or do I not?
Right.
And
exactly.
And this old ass white man, he was literally like 80 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember he criticized one girl in the class and told her that her story was insipid.
Wow.
And I looked it up because I didn't know at the time.
Of course you didn't.
I was like, that was so mean of him to...
It's pretty biting, I would say.
It was pretty biting. And this is what he said to me, though, when I gave him my concern.
Yeah.
There's not enough stories for this to be a stereotype.
That's exactly right.
There's not enough stories in your culture for this to be a stereotype.
Yeah.
So it's funny because Amy Tan wrote like such a great book, and then now we're like, it's now a stereotype.
It's like who can follow her?
I know.
A lot of people, actually.
Yeah. Yes, but you felt like, oh, well, she already told the story.
Yeah.
So now I can't tell my story.
Right.
And I think Youngmi Mayer's point is, oh, yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Because...
And yes, you need to.
How many people have written Lolita over and over again in different ways?
Right, exactly.
And I'm like, good point.
Right.
And I think she had to do a lot of work to get to the point where she believed in her own voice and in her own story, which I think is so crazy that she would have to do that much work because her voice is so unique.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, you would think if she weren't like Korean American or, you know, she would probably think her voice is so unique, but she had to work to allow herself to believe that about herself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, that's a universal experience, right? Like, believing at some point in your life that your voice matters.
Yeah.
And I don't mean just when you're angry or like you face an injustice.
Right.
I mean having a story, sharing it in some way, and standing by it.
Yeah.
No matter the outcome, right? That is like, does your voice matter? Do you believe that, right?
Yeah.
And many of us have, how many of us have not pondered that? Maybe not explicitly, but you have, because you've questioned it, because other people have questioned it, because you've been in challenging circumstances, right?
Exactly.
Artists, this is why when we see artists who are actually prolific and known, it's like, wow, they really had to believe in their work at some point.
Yeah.
But I think for especially people of color, it's such a specific experience. It's not one singular experience, but it is. I wouldn't reduce it down to the question you raised earlier, but that's very much part of it. I feel like that's the epicenter of it. Am I being a stereotype right now?
Yeah.
It's like you have to compare your experience or your voice or your thought to, but what will others think?
Right.
Because there are preconceived notions. Yeah. And it's that. It's like, how does this look against that? How does it contrast? How is it similar?
Which is in stark contrast to that part of her book reading where she talked about the fact that when she lived in Korea and she was an elementary school kid, her dad, the white man, came to school to pick her up, and everybody asked for his autograph, which she gladly gave out.
No, I think she said she was mortified.
He gladly gave out his...
Oh, he...
Yeah, and she was mortified.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, clearly he doesn't fear the stereotype.
Right, exactly.
Oh my god. Exactly. He doesn't fear the Korean gays.
No.
Anyway. White boy game? Is it time?
So, we're not doing a white boy game. That was the last part of her bit. Describe it.
So she calls up... She's like, I need 3 volunteers, and they have to be white men.
And then already there was like this like anticipation in the room, like, what's gonna happen?
And we were like, yes, this is so weird. I've never heard anybody do this.
Or like, payback's a bitch, get ready.
Exactly. And so then like people were like, come on. And of course, it's amazing, like the feeling that they must have had at that moment. Like every white man in the room, like little spotlights on everybody. Like, oh God, not me, not me, not me. You know? And it's, the tables have turned. And so finally she gets 3 white guys up there. One who's like an idiot. He just was I don't know what was wrong with him. But anyway, there's 3 white guys up there, and they had to she like engaged them in this competition where they all had to read jokes that she had written, and whoever delivers them the best wins the game.
But the twist on that is she asked them to say it as if she would say it. So she was asking them to literally mimic her as best as they could.
Right.
Which sounds tremendously cringy.
Oh, it was so cringy.
And I loved every second of it, because here's why. My initial reaction to that was, okay, girl, you sound totally Asian American. You have an American accent.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily asking them to speak in like a ching-chongy caricature voice.
Right.
But to be a woman of color who's asking a white man to socially embody you in your role.
Amazing.
Is so cringy, and I loved it because that's the cringe that we've experienced our entire lives. Not that specific cringe, but it is.
That was a high
cringe.
five you just heard.
It is a low to very high chronic cringe.
Oh my God.
And let me give you an example. This has nothing to do with her bit. This has everything to do with my life.
Yeah.
You might be able to relate to this if you're Asian American or just simply a person of color who lives in America. My family and I would go on a road trip every single year, and we did it till I was 35. That's really weird because my parents are old enough to be my grandparents, and I'm an only child.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, my cheap-ass dad would, of course, rent one room. And even till the age of 35, I still joined them for road trips, bemoaning the fact that I don't have a sibling. And my dad would get up at the crack of dawn at 4:30 and do wall exercises where he grunted. And that is the tip of the iceberg of the insanity. On one trip in particular, sometimes when I drove, my parents would sit next to each other in the back. And one time I was driving in the mountains. We were on our way to Canada. I drove in the mountains. It was quite steep, and my parents decided to get in the back,
like make out.
Like no, girl, you know I never seen them
I'm just
kiss.
kidding.
They held hands twice. They got in the back like toddlers, and they sang old Korean folk songs for over an hour and clapped. And part of me was like, this is something I'll never forget, and what a memory, and what a weird and beautiful time. And the other part of me was like, I'm gonna drive off this cliff.
Yeah,
if they
it's
don't
torture.
Stop.
Both at the same time.
But okay, all of that is to say, I'm totally going on a tangent. All of that is to say, every town that we entered was primarily white because we'd often have to go through the Midwest. And every single space I walked into, I noticed if there was any person of color. I would too. Not by happenstance. I would radar first. It's my first check.
Like,
am I the only
give me a brown person?
Am I the only non-white
person?
person?
Yeah.
And I would be very on guard of how people treated me.
Yeah.
I don't think most white people have to do this or do it. That is one small example of millions, cajillions of examples where it's cringe.
Yeah. Yep.
It's that double consciousness.
Or when you're in that sort of situation, suddenly your voice sounds very white.
You have to be extra articulate.
Extra white, you know?
Yeah. And that's white gaze.
And you and especially when you have your parents with you in that situation, you become so protective.
So protective, an amazing translator.
Yeah.
And cutting off any interaction with your parents, with other people, because you don't want other people to infantilize your parents.
But you're sitting there cringing because the spotlight's on you, baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I literally walked into a diner that got 5 stars in Indiana because we were like driving, you know. And we walked, my biracial family walked in through the doors. The people, like,
you mean your husband and your kids?
Yes. Everybody turned around and looked at us. It was like, you know, that, like in a
record
movie.
dropped?
Exactly. And
the needle dropped.
and then everybody goes back to their, like, food or whatever. And I heard the bartender, or like, not the bartender, it was like somebody behind the counter, she goes, well, we get all types in here.
Oh,
She
my
said that
God.
so loudly. And I was like, hello, I'm going to order food now. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, suddenly I put...
Your guards are up.
All my guards came up. And that's how it must have felt for them. Like, all their guards are up.
Which is why I loved when she did the white boy game.
Yeah. Well, and there was one part where she said, oh, no, this part you have to imitate my mom.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And you turned around and said the best line to me.
I did?
Because she said to the white guy who was, like, you know, reading her joke off of her phone. And then she goes, oh, that part you have to imitate my mom.
So
you have to do a Korean accent.
Right.
And, you know, there's no way that white boy should have listened to her, right? Yeah. And he didn't. But none of us knew what he was going to do.
Right.
Is he going to ching-chong it? Right? Like, is he going to do it or not? Is he going to do it or not? And is he set up to be a racist? Or is he set up to fail the game? And you turned around to me and you said, what? setting up a white man to fail?
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Girl,
Girl, you're insightful. But I remember thinking, that's crazy, because that is how we feel.
Yeah.
Like when you go into a job interview, when you go to, apply. Like I remember when I fucking in high school, I auditioned for white roles because they were all white plays, right?
Right.
And you're going in set up to fail. Now, luckily, I had a wonderful teacher who was, colorblind casting, gender blind casting.
Which is an anomaly.
It's an anomaly. But you're just going, anytime you do that, you're thinking, I'm already set up to fail.
Yeah.
How can I beat a white person at a white person's game?
Yeah.
And now the white people are like, how can I beat a Korean at a Korean person's game? Right.
Bam!
It was crazy. I've never experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
Where I had to sit through that.
Yeah. And we were witnessing it with her.
Yeah.
I mean, she was the mastermind, but the fact that we witnessed that was so interesting. And let me turn the tables again.
Turn them, baby.
When white people witness, even though they're not witnessing shit because it's invisible to most white people, unless they have like a person of color as a partner, or they believe in social justice and they're a social justice warrior, or they work in like, I don't know,
CPS,
some nonprofit, or CPS or whatever.
That's not even true though.
I know.
Okay, but anyway,
that invisibility of whiteness to an encounter where a white person is intentionally or unintentionally setting a person of color up to fail.
Yeah.
Through many, many ways, whether it's through expectation or not through expectation.
Right.
Is the opposite of what we were experiencing in the room. Because in the room, we were witnessing, all the people of color in the room knew exactly what she was doing and why.
Even if you can't articulate it, you felt it in your bones.
Because you knew it was cringy, and you knew she was very intentionally making it cringy. And it was very palpable, and it was very shared, and it was very visible, not invisible. And that, again, speaks to double consciousness, because we know the game.
Well, and there was one guy who, whether he consciously or unconsciously, was trying to like not play the game. Right? Like he was trying to figure out a way to not play it. And she ridiculed him.
She roasted the fuck out of him.
And she was behind him doing the floss.
How he had the floss dance.
So it's like he's trying not to play the game, and yet we're all laughing at him for not playing the game.
Right.
And it was so fascinating. It was just
because all of it was pointing to, it's a setup, homie.
Yeah.
And I know that you know that I know that you know it's a setup.
Yep. Until she finally just had enough and was like, is there another white guy? This one doesn't work. I mean, even that, you know, like you serve one purpose. Yeah. You can't do that purpose, goodbye. You know, like, and that's how, I feel like that's often how people of color are also treated. Yeah. You're not serving the purpose that we put you here for.
Yeah.
You know? So I found that game fascinating. It was it was one of the most interesting parts of the night for me. Yeah. Like I'd never experienced that before in my life.
I have not ever experienced that.
It's almost like probably what people felt at like a Richard Pryor show or something like back in the day. Maybe not. I mean, but really like that sort of social commentary that's done so almost in a sneaky way. Like that's not the word I'm looking for, but you know, it's
done through humor, and it's done through what feels like low stakes.
Yeah.
And it's shticky. Yeah. But it's very deep, and it's very profound. Yeah. If you are a person of color, especially if you're Asian American, right. It's a very different lens and interpretation. Yeah. I think. I think all of that is to say, like, I would describe that whole experience. Mm-hmm. I think it's the title of her book, again, I'm laughing because I'm crying, is so apt. Because I think that described the whole night for me. Mm-hmm. I cried, I laughed, I cried again, I laughed again.
Me too.
There is she will go there, and she will take you there, whether you want to go with her or not. And
there are times she cried.
Yeah, that's true.
And the room was pin drop silent.
Yeah. I was just going to end with, like, I want you to talk about this more, but the Han that came up, I think, in the room, she really cultivated it through what she shared.
I mean,
Talk more about that, though, Han.
Oh, man, you're putting me on the spot. Han is like a very Korean concept that's hard to explain because it is such a Korean concept. But it's the idea that we have a shared pain. I mean, that's the simplest way I can put it, right? We have a shared pain, and it's because there's a shared suffering. It probably includes generational trauma. It's like the thing that makes us interconnected that is painful and yet brings so much laughter.
Yeah.
And I think that's, and for people who know her, this is, very repetitive, but her podcast, Hairy Butthole, is after the Korean saying, don't laugh while you're crying or hair will grow out of your butthole.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't even remember it in Korean right now. It's like, but anyway, it's this, and it's such a nonsensical saying, but really it's like what parents say to kids.
Yeah.
Well, if the kid is after they beat the shit out of you, it's like, no, they like beat you and then you're crying and then they're like,
or it's like a fear tactic,
and then they like tickle you and it's like, oh, you better not cry while you laugh, and it's sort of this way to like cheer you up but then like torture you.
Yeah, that's why our podcast is called what it is. Damned if you do.
Damned if you do, and damned if you don't. You might as well do it then.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I would add about Han is it's intergenerational deep connection from shared trauma, historical trauma,
and national
to familial, right?
Yep.
But the thing that I would add to that is it also cultivates a very fierce spirit.
Yeah.
Of survival.
Yeah.
Of resilience.
Yeah.
Of perseverance.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people take pride in that too.
Yeah.
As we should.
She often says that the funniest people she knows are like
the saddest.
Oh, no, the grannies, like in Korea.
Oh yeah,
who've lived through everything. Yep. They're like the funniest, harshest. They will roast you to no end, like Nikki Glazer step aside. They will.
I remember your story. One of the many stories you shared with me about your grandma, not the one we share, is when she would chase you.
She would take like an 8-hour bath on a Saturday. There's that movie where Jack Nicholson is OCD and then he walks out of the bathroom and it's like a shit ton of like steam that comes out. That was my grandmother every single weekend. And once my brother and I were there, we were in our early 20s. We were just visiting. It's before I actually lived in Korea. My grandmother came out of the bathroom and it was that sort of like steam sauna, like, and she emerged in a towel that was wrapped around her waist. And so her like boobs are just hanging, and she's like an 80-something-year-old lady, so
who's never worn a bra,
who's never.
So her boobs were down to her navel.
And my brother was horrified. I mean, he's a 20-year-old. He's a 20-year-old
Asian American man.
Yes.
Enough said.
And he was horrified. He was like, "Halmoni, please put a shirt on. You can't walk around naked." And she goes, "What, these things?" Then she flopped her boobs around and she said, "They've been dead a long time." and then my brother was like, "Please, I don't care. Please put a shirt on." And my grandmother literally chased him around the room, jiggling her boobs. I was like, what is going on right now?
I mean, nobody's got anything on Korean grandmas.
Oh my God. She really does not give a shite. She was also Korean. She was also a deacon, like a deaconess.
Of course she was, yeah.
And so church. She would drag me out to the church, and as we go outside, and at home, she's always like yelling at me. That shirt is a little too low cut. I'm like, me? I don't wear low cut shirts. But like if she...
You mean Old Navy that shows your collarbone?
100%. And I'm like, okay, lady who runs around with her boobs sticking out. But like if she sees the swell of one of my breasts, she's like, that shirt's too low cut. When you go to church and blah, blah, blah. And then she's always telling me, you got to be more faithful and you have to be blah, blah. She's always nagging me to be a better Christian. And then we walk outside to go to the church. And she sees, because my uncle was the minister, of course, and they lived on campus. And then we walk outside. She sees church people, and she goes, "Wait, let's go back inside." She goes, I don't like those people. And then I'm like, what the fuck? You're supposed to be the church deaconess.
Oh my God.
So, it's all do as I say, not as I do.
Complexity and duplicity.
But it made me laugh so hard every time she did that. Avoiding the shit out of church people after she yelled at me for not being a better church person.
That reminds me of, again, we're totally on a tangent, but let's end here. That reminds me of a memory I have with my mom.
Yeah.
My mom was, pious doesn't capture how much of a she was a Christian, but she was a Christian who really acted for real like a Christian. Mm-hmm. Not just presentation, not just looking good and polished and showing up on time for church. She, she like really served others her whole life and really believed in humanity and love. That was her greatest gift. But okay, having said that, I will share one day. This surprised me, but we were at H Mart in Niles, and we had spent, I think, more time than of course we thought we would, which is probably everyone's experience there. And we noticed when we were exiting that there were two people witnessing with like Christian tracts or little books outside. And I heard her groan. And my mom I've never heard her even do anything remotely close to what your grandma did. Never cheeky, never annoyed, never resentful. I heard her groan and I went,
Did I hear a groan? Did you call her out on it?
No. I went outside and then my mom picked up her pace because I could sense she obviously wanted us to power walk by, which of course is what I wanted to do.
Right.
Well, we couldn't because guess who? One of the people was her sister.
Oh, fuck.
And then they had to catch up, right? And I laughed hysterically.
Oh, Lord.
So...
That's it, man. That's all we got.
Yeah, but I'm so glad we went together.
I don't know if we have convinced our listeners to read her book or at least listen to her on, her podcast, or at least follow her on socials, but she's a fresh voice, man.
Yeah.
She's a fresh voice.
Yeah, and anybody who likes storytelling should expose themselves to good storytelling.
That's right.
Whomever it comes from.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you. Take care.
See you next time. Thanks to Mia, our producer extraordinaire.
And to Clark for this awesome music we got for free, $99.
You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever.
You can also email us at damnedifyoudopodcast@gmail.com. It's a mouthful, but you're worth it.